So if you have both chronically elevated insulin and chronically elevated carbohydrate in your blood, stop pouring carbohydrates down your neck. Do that yesterday. I say that insulin resistance is the underpinning etiology of diabetes type 2, which it isn't. Eat fat and sugar in a mixed diet pretty much all the time, and what you'll be doing is trying to run your drivetrain with two gears at once. Insulin isn't the driver, it's a player. After 3,800 million years of evolution, at least, the liver is as dumb as
I have a hard time believing that is actually what's going on.
The Ben Bikman Randall cycle video, man. What were you saying about that?
It started off, you actually pretty much summed it up pretty well last week when you said the Ben Bikman video started off fine. It was fine until it wasn't, because in the beginning, he actually gets it correct when he says that the Randall cycle, which isn't a cycle at all, and he tacitly mentions that. He doesn't explicitly state that, but he understands it. He says that it's a cross inhibition between two of the substrates. Of course, he did throw in the word competition a few times, which I said was understandable in terms of its incorrect nature. You know, getting it incorrect is understandable and saying it that way, but it's not.
Funny, I said the exactly same thing in my video, which is yet to be published. Carry on.
Okay, yeah. Yeah. And my whole thing is, if you call it a competition, what that means is if you eliminate the enzymatic inhibition that's occurring, the competition would still be happening. The mitochondria would be oxidizing more of the glucose if it's oxidizing more glucose, right? You know, in the cell. And then same thing for fat without an enzymatic inhibition. The actual thing that's happening is the cross inhibition. It doesn't matter whether the mitochondria are oxidizing glucose at that time per se. What that does mean, though, is that there are typically more enzymes in the cell that are involved in glycolysis, first of all, and less that are involved in beta oxidation, at least being active. Anyway, that's a whole other discussion, and that's just getting really pedantic. But he did get it right when he said that. And then he also made sure to mention that fat does cross-inhibit glucose, or inhibit glucose, and so does glucose in terms of its inhibition of fat, which most vegans, whenever they mention the cycle, tend to leave out. The problem that I had was whenever he started talking about insulin and how it is the facilitator, no matter what, just unambiguous, always the facilitator of glucose administration into cells. Explicitly, that Randall said that, which is not what Randall said, because I've read his papers.
That's right.
He did not say that.
No, he didn't. No. The word that Ben actually used repeatedly in his video was dictator or dictates. Insulin dictates the fuel provision use. If there is insulin present, then lipolysis is blocked, said Ben, blocked, and sugar will be used. Yeah. He said, because insulin dictates this is so. Here's my issue with that. A dictator gets what they want. That's why they're a dictator. That's what a dictator is. I've been accused of being one myself. It's not true. I tell you why it's not true, because I don't always get what I want. Dictators do. Now, if we assume that Ben is correct, which would be a false assumption on this because he's not, and we said, okay, insulin is a dictator of which fuel is used and which is not, tell me then, why is it that insulin ever goes up above the homeostatic set point for insulin, ever? Because if it gets what it wants, it knocks on the door of the cell, says there's sugar here, shall we let it in to the cell? And given that insulin is a dictator in Ben's model, then the door will be opened unto that dictator who says, open the door. It gets its way. So why does insulin build up? Go.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's the issue that I had, because first of all, before I even get into the reason why that's not the case, the fact that he once again said that Randall said that is not the case. And it's not even the case that he even really remotely experimented with it that emphatically or put that much emphasis on insulin in his papers. He mentioned that it could be, an influence, and it definitely is an influence. That is the case, because all hormones are influences on bodily processes. That's true. It's not a dictator. And it's precisely that example that you just gave completely undermines that.
I mean, is it not Ben himself that speaks multiple times a week about insulin resistance?
Yeah, exactly.
The very thing that does not exist, were he correct that it's a dictator.
And that's exactly what I said in my video. No matter the manifestation, whether it be physiological insulin resistance, which typically happens in a ketogenic state over time, or what's colloquially deemed pathological insulin resistance, which isn't pathological. That's why I say colloquially deemed, because it's not a pathology. And that's one of the problems that I have with Ben. He continues to say, I just saw a YouTube short of his, where he said that insulin resistance is one of the most, if not the most, I don't know exactly what his verbiage was, but the most endemic and ubiquitous health crisis and issue in the, at least in the United States.
Yes.
And I'm thinking, well, it's not a health issue. It's a physiological adaptive response to a stimulus.
Yes.
And it depends on, I mean, there's multiple stimuli for it, depending on the context. When it comes to this context, the pathological insulin resistance, quote unquote, that seems to be a Randle cycle situation within a cell. And that's evinced actually by the inhibition of the GLUT4 transporter by specifically citrate. But at the end of the day, it comes down to a surplus of acetyl-CoA. That's what that's what it actually is. And when you see that inhibition, it's not like when you talk about inhibitions, it's not an on-off switch. It depends on the degree of the inhibition, whether something will overcome the other. The whole video that I had put out, which will be out publicly in a little over a week, it's already scheduled though. That's what we talk about throughout the latter half of the video is, well, if insulin resistance exists, then this completely undermines your argument, like entirely. And I don't know. Anyway, let's get to this graph. I want to hear what you have to say about this.
Yeah, this is interesting. This is something I've found in the last week or so. It appears in a paper that talks about another issue, really. It's a side issue, but it's the best, most accurate representation I've seen. This is much better than those two graphs that we've been using to explain the so-called Randle cycle, I think. Okay. I think those two, I mean, I think we could just about flush those now. Perhaps as a conceptual idea, they might be useful for some people, but also they seem to be more confusing than of assistance as well. And I think this is a diagram that gives us a better idea, I think, about what the issue is here and what it is that causes the Randle cycle to occur. And that's not insulin. Right, so here it is. You're seeing a mitochondria there on the screen, an example of a mitochondrion, I should say, singular, mitochondrion. And there's a depiction there of the TCA cycle, the Krebs cycle, the tricarboxylic acid cycle, whatever you want to call it. And it shows various pathways in and out of that by, in this case, glycolysis is shown. Direct import of lactate from the external compartment to the cell is shown. The import directly from the external compartment to the cell, the import-export of citrate is shown there in yellow. Various pathways of acetyl coenzyme A from the cytosol to various lipid-based constructions, such as most notably cholesterol and triglycerides, basically, is what's shown there. And then there's also an indication there of the glutamate pathway as well, shown there in blue. So that's all very interesting stuff. That doesn't give you any idea about the Randle cycle and how it works, because what's missing from this chart altogether is beta oxidation of fatty acids. And the reason it's missing from this chart and this paper is because this paper is about something different. And that's not really relevant to what this paper was talking about. There are several other things missing from this chart as well, which we'll get to as they become relevant. But what this boils down to is that this is really akin to an analogy, if you like, is that this is an inertia problem. What do I mean by that? A heavy freight train steaming along the tracks cannot be brought to a halt on a dime. It's going to take several miles to pull that thing up. You pull on the brakes, it takes a long time to get that momentum down to zero. Now, to get the momentum from zero back to the same speed in the opposite direction is going to take the overcoming of the inertia of that train, that whole train. That's what's really going on in the so-called Randle cycle and its effects on so-called insulin resistance. What the Randle cycle actually does say is that the mitochondria, plural, tend to want to continue doing what they are doing. So if they have hitherto up to now, most recently been burning sugar, they want to keep doing that as long as sugar is available for that purpose. It takes a lot to shove the thing off sugar and back to fat. The inverse is also true. If the mitochondria have been oxidizing fat, as long as there's fat available to oxidize, it's difficult for sugar to get in. Why? Because in the fatty situation, the fat oxidizing situation, citrate builds up in the cell cytosol. It's that one that's in big black print there with the yellow form around it. Citrate, it says. So what Ben Bikman said was, well, you're burning, he said, multiple times, a lot of fat, he said, and citrate can get into the cell cytosol, he said, which is true. Here's my question, though. How? Other than exporting it from the external compartment. Oh, look, there's a transporter on the mitochondrial membranes.
Right.
It's called CIC. It's an antiporter. It takes a citrate out of the mitochondrial space and puts it into the cytosolic space in exchange for malate. Ah, okay, fine. It blockades the glucose 1-phosphate fructose, blah, blah, that complex at the top of that old diagram where they had the two and those backwards and forwards. Those enzymes, they are blockaded by citrate, and the buildup of acetyl coenzyme A, attendant with that, blockades the PDH complex. So basically, sugar is tapped at 3 or 4 different points. So it cannot flow readily through that system. Ergo, the fact that there is fat there to provide the energy means it will continue to do that. And that's fine with the cell, as long as there's fat available. If fat starts to become scarce, the effect of the fat on maintaining its own oxidation wears off and sugar starts to pour through, should it be available for doing so. There's also a blockade at the GLUT4 level, which is shown there as where glucose enters the cell, the green one. That's a GLUT4.
I think that's the most important detail.
It is, because what most people don't understand about that is, where is GLUT4 localized within a cell? Well, it's not a set site. People say, it's on the cell membrane, as is shown in this diagram here.
It has to be recruited to the cell membrane.
That's right. It exists under various cellular conditions, rather than as a transmembrane protein, as is shown here on the diagram. What actually happens is the thing buds off on itself, makes a kind of sphere of phospholipid bilayer, which then becomes discontinuous with the cell membrane, and it drops into the cell. So what you've got is a spherule with a GLUT4 in its membrane. So it can't move sugar from the outside of the cell to the inside of the cell at all, can it, under that circumstance? Because it's not transmembrane anymore. It's turned off. The door is locked from the inside. So no amount of insulin going knocky, 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 knocky on the insulin receptor will tell the GLUT4 to activate and let sugar through, because it's not there.
Right.
So that's the bit that people are missing. And the thing that causes the spherule to translocate up to the membrane, flower out, open up and become part of the membrane to allow sugar to go through is the AMP kinase activated pathway, i.e. lowered cellular energy below a certain level will cause that to occur. Precisely in order to maintain the homeostasis of the energy in the cell. Sorry, go, Eddie.
Right. No, there's other ways to activate it. Interestingly, metformin does that.
By the same mechanism via substitute. You're quite right.
And then same things with all of it will be the same mechanism. There's just other things that activate the same mechanism. Hormones like adrenaline and noradrenaline will do it too. But
it's a complex cascade of proteins.
Right. And if you understand the hormones and what their roles are, and you understand how metformin works as the sole ingredient of the drug metformin, then it makes complete sense as to why it will recruit the glucose or the GLUT4 proteins to the cell membrane.
That's it.
But anyway, the entire point that I tried to make to Ben, I mean, he has it completely backwards, and most people do when they call insulin. And I think this is a really ridiculous argument, and I don't know why it's being stated, that insulin resistance is some sort of cellular tinnitus to insulin.
Okay.
It really, it really, that's exactly how they describe it. It's you spike your insulin a bunch, and it spikes, troughs over and over and over again for months and months, years on end, and eventually the cells fail to respond to insulin. It's like, what is causing that though? A cell can't become immune. I mean, here's something that I think they need to understand is that the entire body is a set, and a set is putting it lightly, of chemical equilibria. A very simple equilibrium is your glass of water that people think is static, but it's a moving reaction. That doesn't, when you have a glass of water sitting there and that reaction keeps going backward and forward all simultaneously, after a while, it doesn't just get tired of responding to the stimulus and just stop and just fail to perform its reaction. It does it all the time because it's a law of, it's reality. And that's the same thing with a cell. A cell is, there's chemistry going on within the body between the cell and hormones. Okay. That doesn't just fail. There's something that causes the cell, or whatever is concerned here, to not respond to the stimulus.
Yes.
And what it seems to be, if we were to refer to the other, graphics that we usually cite for the Randle cycle, conveying the concept, it seems to be that inhibition of GLUT4 by citrate, like we were just discussing here.
Okay, so we've got inhibition of GLUT4 probably by citrate, but absolutely by the AMP kinase pathway below a certain energetic level in the cell. Yes. We've got the blockade of the G6P, that F6P, that one, that enzyme complex there. We've got that one blockaded because of citrate and because of elevated acetyl coenzyme A in the mitochondria in that situation. We've also got PDH blockaded. So we've got 1, 2, 3 taps blocked out. Okay, we are not letting sugar flow through here. If that whole system, that whole cascade is fully activated in that manner, all right? The opposite situation, we've got sugar pouring through a cell because GLUT4 is up on the membrane, it's open, there's an insulin sensor activated and it's pouring sugar through according to a concentration gradient from the blood. Sugar is entering the cell, it's going through that whole enzyme process. PDH is not blockaded, acetyl coenzyme A is pouring into the citric acid cycle, that acetyl coenzyme A being exactly identically the same as the acetyl coenzyme A that was previously being produced by beta oxidation. So what's the difference? Why would citrate be building up in the cell cytosol in the case of the fat burning and not in the case of the sugar burning? And again, I'm using the term burning. I wish we had all stopped doing it, including me. It's not burning. What's the difference? What is the mechanism? Well, this is my best shot at trying to get it across in the way I understand it. When you undertake beta oxidation, the things that are released into that space by that beta oxidation, acetyl coenzyme A, absolutely, but also NADH and something else, FADH2. Right. Yeah. Okay. When you are burning sugar, you are not adding FADH2 into the situation.
Yeah,
there is some there already because of, if you look at the SDH enzyme there in green, it's the one that links succinate to fumarate at about 7:30 on the clock. Yep. And you'll see FADH2 swinging off the succinate dehydrogenase enzyme at that point on the citric acid cycle. So there is some there in a cell, and it's always there, and it's always part of that reaction. But what happens allosterically if you pour a bunch of FADH2 into that mitochondria from another source, i.e. beta oxidation?
I'm actually not familiar with that reaction.
It's going to slow it down because basically when you try to add anything to a solution, the more of that stuff is already in that solution, the harder it is to push more of that stuff in there. So that's basically how that works. So that reaction slows down. Whoops. Fumarate level drops. Whoops. Malate level drops. Whoops. Oxaloacetate level drops. Whoops. The citrate level would then drop. Hello, we've got an issue. It's how does that work then? Well, the thing that you need to understand is that FAD to FADH2 succinate dehydrogenase thing that we've just been talking about there on that graph, that is functionally and physically located in a certain place within the cell. It's not a reaction that occurs in that mitochondrial matrix space. It's shown as such on the diagram, but that's not really so. Guess where it happens? It's in the membrane. And the thing that makes it happen is a thing called coenzyme Q10 or ubiquinol, which is shown on the electron transport chain insert there as CoQ, and it's above the second complex of the respiratory chain there. So what that's going to do is cause the NAD level in the cell to just dip just that bit. And it's that change in the cellular energy status that is the thing that's maintaining the issue. How does that work? Well, there is a blockade when you're burning a lot of fat, also at another enzyme called aconitase, which is at about 130 on the chart. It links citrate with isocitrate. That is inhibited strongly by fat burning because of a higher amount of NADH being poured into the cell. That blockades citrate from moving through to isocitrate and thus causes the citrate level to build up in the mitochondria, in the matrix space. Then in the cell cytosol, we grab malate, as shown above there, and we swap those across. So now what we've basically done is we have blockaded really 3 of those enzymatic steps in the Krebs cycle. And it's the oxaloacetate, citrate, and isocitrate reactions that are not functioning. So we have a slightly lower level of energy in the cell. But hang on, if you block that cycle, don't you kill somebody? Would be your next question. And that's where the other thing that's not shown on this graph comes in. There is a step, an enzymatic reaction that occurs allowing malate to skip oxoacetylate, you know what I'm saying, citrate and isocitrate, and skip directly across the cycle to the other side at about 4 o'clock to alpha-ketoglutarate. So it's a subcycle that can occur without those other three enzymes occurring. That's what's holding the concentration of citrate up. So it's the increased NAD in the cell as promoted by the rapid rate of beta oxidation in the matrix. Plus, we're adding FADH2 to the situation to slow the rate at which all of this can occur, because it's all driven by the respiratory chain in the first place, thus lowering the energy low enough to hold the citrate concentration up to have that situation occurring. GLUT4 is disabled, brought down into the cell because of AMP kinase pathway, which is an energetic sensor, but not so low as to cause a problem for the cell. So fat burning keeps fat burning. When it runs out, the energy level drops still further. That disinhibits the whole wheel. Everything starts flowing again, and everything starts to flow through, including sugar, so long as it's available to do that, and so long as we're prepared to wait long enough, because there's quite a bit of inertia there. That's what the Randle cycle really is.
Yeah. What do you have to say about people that have, for example, diabetes, that, because Ben in his video had said, he had claimed that people with diabetes sort of cannot shift over to fat burning mode. Not that they can't, they don't have the physical capability, but their bodies have a harder time doing such a thing. So it elicits them to eat more carbs, you know, after a short period of time to keep spike.
Yeah.
It's
a circular logic, isn't it? Because the reason for that is chronically elevated insulin.
Right.
And the reason for the chronically elevated insulin is because of the unnecessary contraindicated carbohydrates that person has been pouring down their necks.
Right. Yeah. Right.
Anyway,
yeah. Okay. It's actually a pretty dense situation. It's pretty saturated here because you know, with people with diabetes, I actually want to ask you about this. I want to ask you, you know, your opinions on it. People that have diabetes that are exhibiting, you know, insulin resistance, which they use those interchangeably, diabetes and insulin resistance.
Oh, they say that insulin resistance is the underpinning etiology of diabetes type 2. We're talking.
Right. Yeah.
Which it isn't.
So. Yeah. And so typically what it's said is that the insulin resistance causes these people's cells to not be able to sequester any glucose at all, and therefore utilize it at the behest of insulin's administration, or what it's supposed to be. You know, it's supposed to be an administration, but it's not happening. And so their cells are starving, and yet they're actually consuming, you know, all that glucose. They're just not able to use it. First of all, I wanted to ask you if there's any truth to that. You know, is that actually what's happening? Because I have a hard time believing that is actually what's going on. These people with diabetes have chronically elevated blood glucose cannot use the glucose available to them, despite them only consuming glucose, and therefore their cells really only oxidizing glucose, like you just said, you know, since they have chronically elevated insulin and glucose. So is that actually what's going on?
Well, anyone that has elevated blood glucose has a level of glucose in their blood which is above that which they can use. And the thing that will determine that most strongly is the number of activated GLUT4s that are translocated to the cell membranes on any given cell, and the activation of those by a linkage with the insulin receptors on the membranes of those cells also, which sets off another cascade of things that makes the GLUT4 able to do its thing. So first of all, it has to be moved to the membrane, and second of all, once it's there, it needs to be activated by insulin to do its thing. Cool. So if you have both chronically elevated insulin and chronically elevated carbohydrate in your blood, I think it's pretty clear what we can say about your diet and what needs to change and when that needs to change. Stop pouring carbohydrates down your neck. Do that yesterday if you're a diabetic.
No, I agree. I agree. But if we were just talking about how the GLUT4 transporter needs to be translocated, and one of the things that actually prevents the translocation of the GLUT4 is, let's just say, not excessive, but a significant amount of fatty acid oxidation, then that would mean that those people's cells are mainly oxidizing fatty acids. But if that were the case, then why is it the case that actually you find that
I think I'm with you now. Yes, I think the problem there, my opinion of the problem there, is that these are people who are trying to drive their drive chain using two gears at once. So what we're doing is grinding our gears.
Okay, so you mean like eating a mixed diet of fat and glucose. Yes. Okay. That's what yeah.
Exactly that. You got it.
That's actually the answer that I kind of was looking for, because that's what I said in my video.
Well, you got it right again. Goodness gracious.
Because
$1 million.
The thing about Ben in his video was when he talked about the I to G ratio in the first place, because he always talks about it. He has a whole lecture on it. I said in the video that, of course, those hormones, being hormones themselves, are going to have an influence on those processes. They're just not dictators, like he said. And that was my whole issue with it. For example, if insulin were a dictator, then why is it the liver in hyperglycemic events, especially within diabetics, still produces glucose through gluconeogenesis? Because it does. Metformin is a drug that stops that from occurring. It stops the liver from producing as much glucose in such an event. Well, and in fact, if you actually look at the enzymes involved in glycolysis and gluconeogenesis, you'll actually see that if you were to refer to the original Randall cycle graphics, that once again that we usually cite, you'll see that PFK1 is inhibited by citrate, but the thing is it doesn't really do a good job of showing that PFK2 is also inhibited, because they're both inhibited. Yeah. And the thing about PFK2 is if you inhibit PFK2, there's this chain of events that occurs, and I'll have to look at it again to have it like in the very forefront of my brain, that actually stimulates the activity of one of the three, because there's really only three major regulator enzymes of gluconeogenesis. It actually will stimulate it. And so you get this whole mishmash of reactions going on. And so I actually, to simplify it for people, because most people don't want to hear all that enzymatic talk and all that, I say that if you inhibit glycolysis in the liver, let's say through excessive beta, or not excessive once again, but a significant amount of beta oxidation in those cells, then you stimulate gluconeogenesis.
Correct.
The degree to which you inhibit glycolysis is typically commensurate, not exactly, but for the sake of the argument, with the stimulation of gluconeogenesis. And so you have this situation occurring where people have a bunch of, they have hyperglycemia, but their liver continues to pump out more glucose. And I covered this, I should have covered it in this way with Abby Sharp. I did a video on Abby Sharp a while back.
Abby not so sharp.
Right, exactly. Sharp as a bowling ball, right? But she actually said that—
Nothing wrong with bowling balls, you bigot.
Right? Sorry about that. Sorry. But no, she said that the liver doesn't realize that there's excessive glucose in the bloodstream, so it continues to pump more out. And the reason, and completely wrong, but the reason the liver doesn't know that, as if it has its own volition and cognition, but the reason it doesn't know that is because the cells aren't getting the glucose that they require.
Right.
And I was thinking, well, to an extent they are, or else you die. So that's not true.
Yeah. But so after 3,800 million years of evolution, at least, the liver is as dumb as fuck.
Yeah, exactly.
Or maybe it's Abby not so sharp who should take that label instead.
Yeah.
Good. I'm glad we covered that.
I thought it was, I thought it was pretty interesting with the gluconeogenesis thing. And then once again, it goes right back to the reason I even brought it up, is that insulin is not a dictator, or else that would be shut off. Glucose would be always forced into cells. And I think another reason why insulin resistance, as the concept that it is, and the false diagnosis that it is, takes so long to develop, despite the same stimulus occurring over and over and over again. It's a multifaceted issue, but I think one of the main reasons is actually because the more you inundate your cells with glucose and you cause them to be damaged and therefore divide and then divide and then divide and divide, the body starts to slow down in a way. I mean, we talk about telomeres, for example, and the rate at which the cells can actually recover from that seems to slow down as well. Activity levels do play a role as well, because the more that people become inflamed as the years progress, the less they become active anyway. And once again, it's a multifaceted issue, but at the end of the day, I think that the best theory that we have, I'll call it a theory for now, but so is just a side note, so is the Stewart model for pH balance, right? But it's been yet to be disproven.
That's right.
So the only theory that I think the best theory that we have is this Randall cycle situation. And I actually invited Ben to come up on the channel and talk to me about it. I said that actually he didn't have to do it on the channel. We could just have a private discussion, because I don't really care about, it's not about the publicity. It's about actually talking about the issue and getting to the root cause of it. And I have yet to hear from him, but it's been 2 days, I think. My comment on his YouTube video did not stick, but I think that's because I put a link in the comment, and YouTube will delete those. If there's a link in your comment, it'll delete them from the person's video, which is just ridiculous. But I'm hoping that he actually shows up, because I want to talk to him about that.
Right. I too invited Ben to have a discussion with me, only the discussion that I'd be having with Ben would be a public one. Because to me,
I said that I wanted it to be public.
Yeah.
I said that I wanted it to be public because I wanted other people to learn from it too. But I said it didn't have to be if we wanted to actually talk, face to face about it. And, we'll see. I heard that he kind of didn't take you up on your debate offer, or maybe even just.
Well, he won't have heard it yet because my video responding to Ben's video at the time that you and I are recording this discussion right now hasn't occurred. It hasn't been made public yet.
I thought you had already done that before in the past.
No, I've never made a video responding to anything Ben has said. I have made mention of my disagreement with a lot of what Ben has to say about insulin resistance on multiple occasions, but I've never made a video focused on Ben or something that he's said. This will be the first time, and I think it's a doozy. I really do, because basically, as you've said, as I've said, as others have said, Ben's video was absolutely fine until it wasn't. He gave some information but missed out some pretty important stuff. Fine, whatever. Everyone does that. Not everyone. A lot of people do that. But then he just turned around and just completely out of the blue made a completely unsupportable statement based only in his opinion and theology.
It's opinion.
And I guess that's what we're calling him out on.
Yeah. Yeah. And just, once again, when I made the video, I was a little addled with all the information because it was really complicated to talk about the specific mechanisms. I got my brain wired in a different way in that conversation. So there were some things that I should have said where I didn't say them, like I just didn't say anything. And there were other things where I could have said them better. And so in the editing process, I did put like cuts with text, and I was like, actually, here, this is what I should have said. It wasn't like I was completely, errantly espousing erroneous stuff, but I just wanted to say that, especially, if this video that we're recording right now comes out before mine does, because I set my premieres pretty far in the future. But yeah, that did happen. But at the end of the day, we kind of covered the main issue, is that insulin is not the dictator that Ben wants it to be. Cells do not experience tinnitus to insulin. That doesn't happen. That doesn't happen with anything in the body. And therefore, he has it completely backwards by saying that insulin is what causes the Randle cycle situation, or rather, insulin resistance is what causes the derangement of the cells to respond responsibly to this little cycle, or whether it's the gear shift. Right?
Yes.
It's actually the opposite. It's the Randle cycle itself that causes this insulin resistance scenario. And once again, that is a theory, but it's been yet to be disproven, I think, because I'll tell you what, the cellular tinnitus theory of insulin resistance has yet to be proven at all. It has not been proven. So that's what
I mean, the other challenge I threw out to Ben was I inquired in a rhetorical fashion, absolutely, as to whether his education had lacked the experience of having to build what's called deterministic models, meaning everything in whatever level of your model must be entirely explained in cause and effect by the things above it. These things feed into this. Those things feed into those things, etc. Because it seems that's what's missing from Ben's comprehension of the Randle cycle. Or if that's not missing from his comprehension, then what's going on is he has a barrier to push, he has a theology to push, he has a flag planted in a hill somewhere that he has to defend, and potentially there's some financial, behind that as well. I mean, we've all got to make a living, absolutely. There's a great way of doing it if you'd like to, though, boys and girls. Do you want to tell us about a great way of making a living, perhaps, Eddie?
Well, I think you're doing a pretty good job of doing that right in the top right of the screen.
Right, yeah, but that's my one. That's my link. Let's talk about your link, because we want to see people in your shop.
I've had one for a few months with Cerule, selling of course, everyone on your channel is familiar with the Stem Enhanced product. And actually, you know what? Since we're on that discussion, I can tell you an experience that was just brought to the forefront of my mind that I almost forgot about. I had actually been out of because I take actually every single oral product that they have, because I get most of mine for free. And if people come to my channel and watch all my videos all the way through, they can figure out how to do that. Or if they email me behind the scenes, which that's linked in my channel as well, or in the about section and all that. But I get all of them for free. And so I of course take the daily dosage of all of them. But for a while I didn't have them, and I had just begun to work out again, which is, whenever I work out, I don't, pussyfoot around the actual working out. I will actually it's very intense with the resistance training. My body was not used to it. And if anyone is familiar with who I am, I have a debilitating, it is still to a degree debilitating, which is why I cannot hold a normal job. structural condition, which is very painful. It's hypermobile EDS, and people can look into that if they like, or they can check out my video on it on it's my channel trailer. And so I massively inflamed myself because I wasn't used to doing the exercise that I did that day, on top of the fact that I pushed through all the pain that I normally experience. I'm trying to add muscle in order to increase my stability of my body. The lack of stability is what causes so much pain. So I have to force through the pain in order to gain the muscle. It's just, it sucks. But anyway, I actually couldn't walk the next day. And it wasn't because I hit legs too hard or something. It was actually because of all the pain in my upper body and all that. The nerve pain was, it was immense. That day I had picked up my products, took all of them at one go. And within about 3 or 4 hours, I was up and not just like walking slowly or something. I was like, it almost felt like I was back to normal. I could feel the heat from the inflammation I was already experiencing, because as we all know, heat will be a result of inflammation, but it was like, it wasn't associated with the pain. And that was actually my absolute sell for the products. I had experiences before, and I also trusted the science behind it, but that was my absolute sell for taking, especially the Cyactive formulas. So, you know, well, it's one formula, the Cyactive products. So the other products that are based around the Cyactive formula. That was my immediate sell. And so I especially take the Cyactive every day. I take 4 of the Cyactive joint, 2 of the regular Cyactive, and then Collagen Active once a day, and the Hydroactive. And you know what? That's probably, since I'm on carnivore, that's probably what's staving against my scurvy development, because it has vitamin C in it. But, you know, because of course, if I stopped taking that, then I would have, you know, develop vitamin C. Yes. Forget the other 2 years that I was doing carnivore without doing that.
Yeah, unfortunately, I didn't actually start taking Cyactive at all myself until I'd been carnivore and therefore dead for nearly 5 years. So I should have been dead of scurvy 5 years before that. So that's not going to be an issue.
And I've been out of Hydroactive for about a month or 2, and we know that it takes about 2 to 3 months, probably less than 3 months, about 2 months max to develop symptoms of scurvy. So, you know,
as distinct from symptoms of gingivitis, young man. Not you, young man. Another young man that we're referring to.
The other one.
A younger man. That other clown. Yeah.
I've actually had requests to react to him before, and
don't bother.
I'm not going to do it.
The
thing is, I really think it's important to cater to fans, but I told the one person that recently suggested that I react to him, and I said, well, I usually react to people that are worth my time. Ben Bikman, I think he's worth my time. Abby Sharp, I think she's worth my time because of how big of a following she has. But Joey Schwartz, who? Okay, right, good, yes. But
excellent. All right. So, in summary, the Randle cycle occurs because when fat is burning, for want of a better term, that causes a reduction in the rate at which the rate at which the TCA cycle can occur due to the blockade of various enzymes in that cycle. And there is also a transporter that moves malate in and citrate out of the cell in that situation, which then signals a bunch of other things to occur, including the blockade of GLUT4 and also the PFK enzyme thing that we were talking about earlier, PFK1, all of that, G6P, F6P, whatever. That one. So therefore sugar is blockaded out while ever that's happening. In the situation where we're running out of fat, then the cellular energy level will drop still further from where it would have been running on sugar. And that causes the AMP kinase cascade to translocate a bunch more GLUT4 to the membrane, as well as it upregulates the genes encoding for the production of yet more GLUT4s, which can then be translocated fairly quickly as well. And then sugar will start to pour through. That'll be fine. The insulin resistance will no longer exist. Job is a good one. Eat fat and sugar in a mixed diet pretty much all the time. And what you'll be doing is trying to run your drive train with 2 gears at once, hence grind, the result of which will be lowered energy status, increased level, therefore, cause and effect of inorganic phosphate, ergo, the AMP kinase activated pathway to most of the pro-inflammatory cytokines. There you go. That's what it is.
And
that's why it works. And insulin isn't the driver. It's a player.
My final note was just more emphasis on the fact that, yes, the I to G ratio does have an influence, but it is not a dictator like Ben.
That's it. Perfect. All right. Thanks for joining us. Join us next time when someone else will be wrong on interwebs, because it doesn't look like slowing down anytime soon, does it? No. See you then.